welcome back to Copenhagen Blue. Last time, we got the Porsche running. Let's see if she still fires up. Fires up like a champ if I've ever seen one. So, I want to look at a few things. I notice when she's cold, we have a little bit of a misfire. I had been told a long time ago that I have shared compression between cylinders 2 and 3. And that little bridge in between those two means that it's always the dead same when it comes to the compression. And I was told that's the reason that I have that misfire until it warms up. I personally want to explore spark plugs, cleaning the fuel injectors, and a few other things before I really have to say, I've got to do a cylinder head gasket. Now I have an entire cylinder head gasket kit, but this car intimidates me. There's a lot of things that I've done, but when it tears into the engine, it's dual balance shafts, and the timing belt is just pretty much like if you screw it up, you're done. And I don't have the money for a motor, so I really don't want to ruin this one. It's only got 153,000 miles on it, and you know, I'd like it to keep going. But we're going to check out the spark plugs today. I think we're going to pull them, and we're going to take a look and see what they look like. And if so, we'll put in some new ones. But let's get started. Now, this engine is not exactly a powerhouse. It's 150 horsepower, 150 foot-pounds of torque, way back in 1985 and a half. For those that are wondering why I keep saying 1985 and a half when I refer to it, is that actually halfway through 1985, they changed things. They changed some of the suspension. They changed some of the things in the motor. So a 1985 and a 1985 and a half are not the same Porsche. But in this case, it's a pretty easy engine to work on, minus the whole timing belt, and there's an oil cooler down there that fails, and there's a oil separator back there that the O-rings can go bad on. Reference sensors, and I mean, it's pretty simple, right? But thankfully, when it comes to maintenance, our spark plugs are pretty easy. They're right there. Let's take a closer look. So you can see we have our spark plug boots that go down, and they actually leave an opening in the intake manifold, so you don't have to pull off the intake manifold, unlike that, where if I want to do spark plugs, the first 3 are pretty easy. The backside, I have to pull the intake manifold off. So it's relatively simple to work on, but let's pull out a plug and let's see what we're working with. One thing we always check your oil. And aside from being a little old smelling, which we need to change it anyway, it's not bad. Now, as we get into our spark plugs, let's see if my light will stay on. Probably not. But just pull off the boot, move it to the side. Now, once we've taken off the spark plug boot, we need a 21 millimeter socket. Now, I know that somewhere I have a specific socket for spark plugs, but I don't remember what the large one is for this. So we're just going to use a socket, and we're going to break it free. Now, you don't use cordless impacts, you don't use any power tools when doing spark plugs, especially when you have things like an aluminum head. You don't want to strip the threads out, so you really want to be able to get feedback and feel what your tool is telling you to do. We're going to go ahead and just give slight pressure to rake that free. It should work nice and easily. And once you get the spark plug broken free, you really should be able to do it by hand. These threads are probably a little dirty, but these spark plugs have been in the cylinder head for a while, and if the plugs that are in here are what I'm thinking, I'm going to date myself here. Good Lord. It's also nice when you pull out your spark plugs. It gives you an indicator of how healthy your engine is. You get to see what's going on in the combustion chamber. And as we pull our spark plug out, okay, it's not what I thought. I had actually thought that I'd put at some point Bosch Platinum 4s in here, because back in the day that was the thing to do. So these are actually just NGK Rs, which should be good, and you can see we actually have a really nice burn on these plugs. They aren't fouled out. A little bit of gasoline soaking into them from you know, all the cranking and everything that we did. But all in all, it's a good looking plug. Let's pull out the other 3. they don't look bad, but it's kind of interesting because here's plug for cylinder number 4. You can see it's got a chocolate brown coating, so that's pretty decent. When you get into cylinder 3, you still have a chocolate coating as far as coloring goes. Dielectric grease on the tip there from when I put those on originally. These threaded in, but you can see that the threads are actually almost wet. And I don't know if that's from oil consumption or whatnot, but you'd think that you'd see that actually reflected on the plug itself. Plug from cylinder 2 looks good. What I do need to do is check the gap though. That gap looks a little tight, but maybe it's not, who knows. And there's cylinder number 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a brush, we're going to clean these up, and we're going to check the gap on them. Well, I don't know if this is exactly the right way, but I don't think I have any carb cleaner or anything, so we're going to use a little bit of brake cleaner. I'm going to spray some in this bowl here. And we're going to take our first one and kind of put the tip in a bath here. And I'm just going to use a plastic bristled brush. I don't want to use anything that could possibly damage the ceramic around the actual electrode or anything. So we're just going to gently scrub and see what we get off of these plugs. You certainly don't want to damage them. I mean, spark plugs aren't horribly expensive, but if you don't have to, you know, go out and buy a set, why buy a set, right? I mean, that doesn't look bad. It's about what it was, but it cleaned it up a little bit. Threads are definitely cleaner. So I'm going to take care of all the plugs, and then we'll come back. Alright, well, we have all the spark plugs cleaned up. I mean, the threads came out pretty decent, just with some brake clean. And cleaning the top, you know, I don't know if it really made much of a difference. But I'm going to run a little sandpaper in between there and see if I can clean up the electrode and just give you, you know, better spots for spark. And then I think we're going to tighten up these. Notice that the tops of the spark plugs on a few of them were loose, although I tightened them up by hand and they seem to be okay. But let's see if it makes a difference. Well, for our cleaning here, I grabbed a little bit of 220 grit sandpaper, so nothing crazy. And I'm just going to run it right in between the electrode here and the top. All I'm doing is just kind of cleaning it up and just taking off any carbon or anything that could be on that surface. On both sides of that, just giving it a good area for firing. We'll just clean it off again. Don't want any of that stuff in the motor. We'll wipe it down. And then we're going to check our gap. Now, to check gap, and this is a cheap little tool from the auto store, but I've had it for years. You just go in on the thinnest side and you rotate around until it kind of stops. And right about here, we're sitting right at about 33 thousandths. Let's see what the spark plug specification is.
Well, for you kids out there, I don't know if you know what this is, but we call these books. They had information in them. You turned pages before you had Groggle and everything.
But in any case, this is a Haynes manual. I've had this since I've had the car, and shows you all the different spark plugs and what they should look like, if it's too hot, if it has carbon deposits. So this is a pretty useful tool. And like a normal spark plug is brown to grayish tan color, slight electrode wear, correct heat range for the engine, and operating conditions. So obviously could be bad. And going through the spark plugs, we need to find where it says our gap. Well, looking in the manual, it actually said to see the label on the vehicle. And if we look right down here on the strut tower, we actually have spark plug type should be a Bosch WR8DS Champion. Kind of cool. My grandfather actually worked for Champion Spark Plug. And it says 0.7 plus 0.1 millimeter. So 0.028 plus 0.004. So based off what I'm seeing, we're actually a little too far open, because that means it should be somewhere right around in here, and we're all the way up here. So now I don't have the right tool for actually closing the gap on the spark plugs. It's actually supposed to kind of look like a C, and it hooks in here, and you bend it just slightly. So I used a different method, which I put it down on a flat surface, and I pressed firmly, but enough to close up our gap. That's probably not the right way, but it's the way that I did it. And when I check our spark plug, we're sitting right, we have a little bit of drag right around that 28. So this one's good. I'm going to gap the rest of them. Alright, so out of that we had one spark plug, number 4, that was actually gapped correctly. Everything else was actually too big. So I'm wondering if that was, part of the reason that I was having the running conditions when it's cold. So let's put the plugs back in and start it up and see what we get. Before I put the spark plugs back in, I am cleaning up the threads with a brass brush. So I'm not actually cleaning the element or anything, but I am cleaning up the threads. Just going around gently and cleaning up. So that way they go in nicely, because you don't want to use anti-seize on spark plugs. You need to make sure that they have good contact with the cylinder and that they're not over torqued. And we're going to put our spark plug back down in the hole. We're just going to start it by hand. So we have our spark plug started by hand. I'm just going to put my socket on. There we go. So our spark plug is bottomed out, and if you ever read the package on a spark plug, it'll say go till it bottoms out and then do a quarter turn. In the Porsche manual here, there's actually a specification for spark plugs, and they are supposed to be torqued down to 25 to 30 newton meters or 18 to 22 foot-pounds of torque. We're going to follow that. But I'm going to put the other spark plugs in, and then we'll torque them all down. Now it might seem like overkill, but this is the 21 millimeter socket that we need with an extension. And here's our torque wrench. I have it set to 22 foot-pounds. So won't take much for us to get a click. Just go tight and right there. We'll do 2-3 clicks. Get cylinder number 2. 3 clicks. Clicks. Right. 22. Well, that really seems low, but okay. Now we're just going to put our wires back on, which is really simple. We're going to put our wires back on. You just push them until they make that click. There we go. There we go. There we go. So every plug is nice and seated. Well, let's fire her up and see what happens. We're going to fire her up. Let's see if it's any smoother right out of the gate. I don't expect anything magical, but it would be nice just to get a little less vibration maybe. I don't know, see if she just smooths out. Well, only one way to find out. Well, did it make a big difference? What do you think? Leave something in the comments if you watched the video. It seemed at first when it fired up it was rough, but then almost maybe as the computer picked up on the timing or something, it did smooth out and the RPMs dropped a little bit. It had normally been sitting about 1100. Firing it up, it sat right about 950, which is a little high. It should be about 840, but I had the idle turned up a couple of years ago. Well, and I say couple, I mean 20. But that's part of why it idles a little bit higher. She did start to smooth out. I'd be curious to see what happens when it warms up. But as you can see, it's not getting any warmer in here. But I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Hit like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.